Welcome, everyone. It is Saturday, February 1st. I don't know where January went, but it's February 1st, 2025. And I'm thrilled to welcome back Samantha Holland. She is coming to us from Scotland. And she is going to, and I love having her as a guest teacher with my classes. And she is going to introduce herself and then introduce the class. And we'll go from there. I will magically reappear towards the end of class and conduct our discussion. I do not video or audio record the discussions, but of course I do that with the class. And then when Isaiah comes back from his vacation, whenever that is, he will put this class on YouTube. So it might be a couple of weeks before that happens. And so let me take myself off of Spotlight. And thank you so much. And go ahead, Samantha, and introduce yourself and the class.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. It's really nice to be back here, although I wish it was 10 a.m. here. Might feel a bit more perky about this. So yeah, I'm a clinical somatic educator. I work also with somatic experiencing, so I'm in the process of blending that quite a lot. And increasingly what I do is teach counselors and psychotherapists what this thing called somatics is, because a lot of them have no idea. They're trying to incorporate the body and somatics, and there are all these like trainings they can do. So I found it really helpful to kind of be very clear about Tom Hanna's work and what somatics means really specifically there, and then to kind of open up around that. So this class probably reflects a bit of what I'm doing a lot of, which is working with the stress reflexes and the sensations that go along with that for quite a few people. I also run a bookshop, so yeah, there's quite a lot going on. What I would like to say first is that the first part of class and the last part, the first part will be at least 20 minutes, possibly longer in standing. So if you're not okay to stand all the time, then parts of it can be done seated. So I know that Susan always asks that people have a chair, but do make sure that you have a chair or a stool or something like that. And hopefully I'll remember when to say when there's a bit that might work perfectly well seated. And it doesn't have to be that you can't stand for all that time. You can opt to do some of it sitting down as well. That's kind of okay. And in fact, I would invite you to sit either on a chair or sit on the floor if you can get up really fast, right, with alacrity. Now, if I'm just going to talk about the theme of the class for a couple of minutes. And the rest of the class, by the way, will be doing a little bit on the chair and then lying primarily on your back on the ground and then standing probably for at least 10 minutes at the end of class. So there's a lot of standing because actually a lot of Tom Hanna's work is about improving moving through walking, right? So we have to deal with gravity in that way quite a lot in this work. And I'll remind you now, in case I forget, I shouldn't, but I do it the whole way through, to look after yourself in the class, right? Go slowly, never stretch, always pandiculate. So you're going into the area first, slow release, let it go. So it really is a pandiculation, not like a quick movement. If something feels not right to you, or if it starts to feel painful in a way that you don't usually experience pain, right? I know some of us come to this where you're already in pain. Then probably best to stop the movement and either imagine it or think about doing it in a very miniature, in a small way. I would also say that for class today about if I ask you to think about a situation, like a challenging situation, I will say at the time, not a big, stressful, challenging situation, but it's the same sort of thing. Be very gentle with yourself, right? You're just going to be thinking of something a little bit irritating, not something that was extremely stressful or traumatic in your life. So on one level, the class is about feeling into your feet and how your weight is supported through them into the ground. and also about exploring Tom Hanna's idea that, or very central idea, that every movement is a full body movement. And also thinking about whether that means that every sensation is a full body sensation, whether it means that as well. So we'll be noticing, or you will be noticing the relationship of your feet to the rest of your soma, thinking about the four corners and your center, but really thinking about what your feet can tell you about the whole of the rest of yourself, which differs from time to time. And we'll also explore the reflex patterns a little bit in a slightly different way than maybe, and I'll be very clear about what Tom Hanna says and what I'm saying. So we're doing that because I'll be asking you to think a little bit, not just about your physical sensation of yourself, your interoception in that way of your muscles and your neuromuscular system that we're quite used to doing in Hanna's somatics, but also think a little bit more widely about how going into these movements, in and out of these movements, makes you feel as a whole soma. Right? So this concept of what your felt sense might be, why you come to class, right? If your felt sense, your response to it, is something that you want to experience, which is why you come. And I think it is worth mentioning, I don't want to, I want to get to the movement, but Eugene Gendlin, who was a kind of contemporary of Thomas Hanna, who set up focusing, right? People may have heard of focusing. In the way that Tom Hanna talked about pandiculation and somatics as something that's already there. He didn't create it, right? It's already there. Eugene Gendlin said that the felt sense is just something he gives a name to. It's already there in human experience. And that because we have this capacity to have a felt sense, to experience ourselves differently from everybody else from the inside, and then this capacity for self-sensing means that we can be self-regulating and self-healing. So there are a lot of parallels between Gendlin's focusing a bit more on the felt sense and its emotional qualities and Hanna's work. And I think it is worth saying, though, that I've got a quote somewhere about the felt sense. So this was equally radical to Tom's work at the time, right? A felt sense is, this is Eugene Gendlin, a felt sense is not a mental experience, but a physical one. It's physical. It's a bodily awareness of a situation or a person or an event, an internal aura that encompasses everything you feel and know about the given subject at a given time, encompasses it and communicates it to you all at once rather than detail by detail. And one reason I sort of just even want to mention this concept of felt sense, which Peter Levine has really co-opted and uses in somatic experiencing, so it's being used more widely as a term now, so you might have heard it there, is because I think in somatics movement classes, we can get quite caught up in exactly which bit of muscle we might be feeling, exactly what physical sensation is going on, and sometimes lose sense of a wider response to the movements that we're doing and why we're doing them and how they make us feel as a whole soma. Okay, I will invite you to stand up. And we know that, right, just stand as you normally would, which is very difficult to do when you're attending a class because you're very conscious of how you're standing, but just stand. And take a few moments. We're not going to rush this. You're going to be standing for a while to just look around you. So decide where you're going to stand. And you're probably in your own home or somewhere extremely familiar, but just look around you to orient yourself and just really know where you are. So you're basically also telling your nervous system, like, you're fine, you're in a familiar place. And see if you're then able to close your eyes, if that's okay for you, so that you can bring your attention inwards. And if at any point you want to do this part seated, you can sit down and kind of treat your sits bones as your feet, okay? But I'll refer to your feet. But if you do prefer to sit, then you can just think of those little sits bones as mini feet. So I'd like you to just sense from the inside how your feet are connecting with the floor beneath you. And also, as you're noticing this, as you're sensing your connection between yourself and the floor through your feet, just breathe. Remember to breathe. You're not focusing on anything really specific. You're literally just observing what is going on there between your feet, yourself, and the ground beneath you. So you might notice if one foot feels heavier into the ground than the other. You might sense that differently. It may feel as if one foot is maybe almost lifting a little bit away from the ground. Or maybe both your feet feel quite settled into the ground and your weight is balanced fairly evenly. And just sense if you feel more weight in your toes or your heels, and that might differ from one foot to the other. So you're also going to be sensing those other differences between your feet, or if they feel quite similar. And notice as well if your weight is along the outside edge of each foot or the inside edge, or again, if they differ. And as you're noticing the sort of physical feeling of your feet, just see how you feel about being asked to do that, how you feel about it. Maybe there is some kind of felt sense underlying your observations. You might be thinking, oh, this is my pattern. I can really feel my pattern, right? That's one response. Or you might, at the other end of that, be just really curious about what's there, about where your feet feel weighted and really in contact with the ground and where they don't, where they feel a bit pulled away from it. So just take a few breaths and just sense those patterns in your feet, those areas of weightedness and less weightedness. And now I'm just going to ask you to consider how the weightedness in your feet might be echoed in the rest of your soma. So to make that much more concrete, how do your legs feel in relation to your feet? How do your hips feel? So a simple example would be if the inside edge of one of your feet feels really heavy into the floor, how does your hip feel on that side? Does it feel a little bit turned inwards? So just see if for you there's a relationship between how your feet meet the floor and how your hips and your whole pelvic girdle is held in space. You can stay there if you want to and just consider that, or think about right up into your rib cage. How is your rib cage affected by or affecting how your feet are meeting the ground beneath you? Remember to breathe, right? Thinking about your rib cage, breathe. And if it makes sense to you, then take that right up to your shoulders, right? If one foot feels heavier into the ground than the other, how does that affect your hip on that side? How does that affect your rib cage? How does that feel up into your shoulder girdle, your head and your neck? And just notice for yourself, if you feel any of those connections, if you feel that your feet are connected up through your legs to your pelvic girdle, to your rib cage, to your shoulder girdle, or if there's not that much connection there, just notice. Don't try and change it. Don't worry about it. Just notice and breathe and see what's there. So I mentioned your neck and your head. So I'm just going to ask you, if your eyes aren't open, open your eyes gently and just notice if you are looking kind of straight ahead, as if you're looking at the horizon, or if you notice if you're looking slightly up or slightly down or slightly to the left or slightly to the right. And this is just information. Does that relate, though, to the position of your feet, the angle that your pelvis is at, the way that you hold your shoulders? It's useful information for the end of the class as well, when you're considering whether anything has shifted. And with that in mind, we're going to do something that could be called a sort of self-assessment at this point. I think Laura Gates told me about this one. I call it the rag doll now. So I'm gonna ask you to make sure that you don't treat this as though you're trying to touch your toes, right? All you're going to do, if you can, is very gently bend forward so that your hands and your arms can kind of hang in front of you, and close your eyes if you would on the way down, so that so you're not trying to go far down, you're just letting your arms flop like a rag doll. Don't stay too long, open your eyes and see where your hands are in space. So is one nearer to the floor than the other one? Is one hand closer in towards your body than the other one? Are your hands rotated at different angles? So the palms facing, are they facing your body? And as you're noticing this, feel free to come back up and go back into that position if it's a bit too much to just hang like this rag doll for too long. So whether you're still in that position or whether you're going to go back down into it slowly. With your arms hanging down, just notice how that might show up in your shoulders, right? So the position of your hands, one closer to the ground, perhaps, one a bit closer into you, one rotated differently. You might feel that difference in your shoulders, and you might feel it further up or into your soma, but I don't want to have you spend too much time in this position. So just gently, just come back up to standing. Slowly, you're sort of pandiculating all the muscles that contracted to get you down there. And you might want to give yourself a very gentle shake or take a few steps around the space that you're in, because you've been standing for quite a while. And we'll do a standing movement, but I don't want you to feel too stuck. Okay. So this movement, some of you might know it by a different name. I don't know. Martha Peterson calls it reach to the top shelf, which is quite a useful concept. So we tend to describe it as imagining that there's something that you really want, but it's on quite a high shelf. So you're going to reach, you're not going to stretch, because this is somatics and we don't stretch. And this is one that you can definitely do seated. So if you don't want to stand for the next 5 to 10 minutes, then you can do this sitting on the edge of a chair. That's also a possibility. Again, your sits bones would take the place of your feet if you want to do that. So pick a side, your working side, and just imagine that whether it's a chocolate brownie or, I don't know, a book that you've been looking for or whatever is right up there, and just reach up and notice whether you go up onto the ball of the opposite side foot to lengthen that side or whether you don't. And then bring that arm down, come back down to rest. And if you found that you did automatically go up, taking your heel away on the other side, then that's quite a somatic way to do it, right? But just do that deliberately if you didn't do it last time. So just reach up again to that side, go up onto the opposite toes a little bit, and notice that whole one side is lengthening because the other side is shortening to help it, and ease back down. And then you'll have picked a side to start with. So just reach up gently to the other side. And again, you can reach up with your shoulder if you don't want to reach up with your whole arm. And see if you just as easily or at all go onto the opposite side toes and ease back down. Don't stay up too long. Do that a couple of times. Again, just noticing whether one side is easier than the other. And unfortunately, because we're on Zoom, I can't see if everybody's going up onto their opposite heel, but I'm going to invite you to experiment with that a bit. You can maybe alternate from side to side. So if you're reaching up with your right hand, you're going to go up onto your left toes and your hip will also come up. If you're reaching up with your left hand, you'll go up onto your right toes and your right hip will come up. So you're just observing whether that is in fact what you do or whether you have to motor plan and make yourself do that. So it's, again, it's information, a lot of that. And just ease down out of the one that you're doing and just stand at center. And seeing how you feel when you've been doing this movement that shortens one side to lengthen the other and does that alternating. How does that make your sides feel different, perhaps? Make your relationship with the ground beneath you a little bit different. And just stand at rest. And again, notice your weight into the ground. Notice how your feet are meeting the floor. And notice which direction your head is looking in again. Has it shifted or is it still looking straight ahead or to one side or up or down? Okay. So we're just going to do a last set of movements before you take a seat, and we do a short seated movement later. And this is going to be exploring the reflexes that do underlie all of the HANA somatic movements that we do and the clinical work as well. And we'll try to explore them as movement. And this could be a class in itself. I'm sure you're all aware of that. And thinking about them a little bit in relation to the type of stress that they relate to in the soma, in your neuromuscular system and in your nervous system. And it's a good time as well to remember that the real stress is not in going into these reflex patterns, it's getting stuck in them. So we'll be moving into and out of them, which is the whole point of all of Hannah's work. So remember to breathe, remember to be gentle with yourself, remember that less is often more, and that you're just going into these stress patterns so that you can get out of them effectively. So I haven't got enough space to show you. We'll actually be looking not just at 3 reflexes. So I wouldn't do this if I was just going through the 3 reflexes in the way that we're somewhat familiar with, a lot of us. But we will start with what Hannah called the red light reflex. I would call it the short front reflex, and that there are at least 2 different reflexes in what he describes. So the first one, and the one that Hannah describes the most frequently in his book and in his lectures, is the orienting reflex, right? That one where, so if you can, in standing, just see what else happens. Shorten your front, your shoulders might come up as you look around you. So you're doing that looking around space, but you're doing it as if maybe there's a threat or you've just come into a new environment and it's a little bit worrying. It's not strictly a stress reflex. It's an orienting reflex. Don't stay in it too long, right? So ease out of that, breathe into your front, and see how going into these reflexes makes you feel, right? Does it feel different to be doing this and then to just come back to standing? And then probably the next one would be sensible to go into would be what you would know as the green light reflex. Again, I would call that the tight back reflex. And I think it has much more to do with fight. So I'll explain that than flight. So where you're standing, just gently contract your lower back to make an arch, noticing what else moves, noticing whether you're going into it out of habit or if it just happens. Does your chest push forward and do your shoulders pull back? Does your bum stick out behind you a bit? And where's the weight on your feet gone? What about the back of your neck? And what is your felt sense in this position? How do you feel when you stand there with your back slightly arched and your shoulders back? So ease out of that And as I say, that seems to me to be very much about fight. Like there's a challenge in front of you or a day ahead of you. So one might be more negative, one more positive, but it's about kind of going forward and fighting that, meeting that challenge. Now, the one that I think is really interesting is the unfortunately named trauma reflex that I never call the trauma reflex. I just call it the one-sided reflex, right? So, but that's what it is. And I'm going to say that this covers, as you all know from your own soma, right? Taking classes as well as maybe doing clinical work. This reflex, one-sided, covers so many positions, so many reflexes, so many responses. So we're just going to kind of break it down into 3 movements. So one would be almost like a hip hiker. So if you stand and you just put your weight over onto one leg, and so your hip on that side will come up and you shorten one side. And that is almost like protecting your side. So if you have a one-sided surgery or whatever, this is going to be the kind of protective response to that. And then come back into the center and just stand. And I think that this is much more associated with flight, right? This whole one-sided thing, because another way that we might do this is go over to one side, like you're going to leave the room. Like there's somebody you don't want to talk to in front of you, or there's a threat in front of you, and you would just go like around it. So you want to go out of the room to the corner. Okay. And then there's also flinching away. And that's a bit different because that's much more twisty than just leaving. If you're just leaving, you're just going out, but you might flinch away from them. And that might be part of then running out, running away, running in a different direction. So I just want these to be more about movements rather than like specific stuck patterns. Knowing that we can all get stuck. You might feel twisted and you may have, so something like the side bend may be no use to you, right? Because you're really twisted and it's not about this. Okay. And as you're making these movements, there's some really interesting movements going along. Just notice whether one of them feels more familiar than others. So it might be that red light one of orienting. It might be the sort of fighty green light, or it might be one of these versions of the kind of flight reflex, that one-sided one. And just ease back to stand at rest. Take a few breaths. See how you're feeling, whether you're feeling curious about what's going on, whether you're feeling bored at going through the reflexes, whether you're feeling a different sense because of the movements that you've done, the sense of yourself. And lastly, we'll do a very short exploration of what is also red light, but is quite different. The different head position that Hannah uses, but is also, I think, a radically different reflex. It's more like a collapse or playing dead. So if you shorten your front, but your head goes down and you really protect the front of you, it's like you've given up, right? You're not looking around. You're actually just protecting yourself. And see how tight and tense that might feel. And don't stay too long, right? Breathe length into your front to come up and out of that. Go back into it once more if you're okay to do that, and notice your feet, right? Your feet, your legs. As you slump down, do your knees come closer together? Do your feet really go like in towards each other? And then ease back up out of that. And again, I would take a moment either to stand and just see how you're standing, or walk around the space that you're in, okay? Just noticing your own response to the movements that you've made thus far. And when you're ready, this is when we're going to do just one set of movements on the chair. So get your chair and sit, I guess, kind of towards the edge of it, so your sits bones can move around a little bit. So there are, before I start this, I'm going to say there are three possible arm positions. And I started doing this movement quite a lot recently because I had a really bad fall on the ice in Edinburgh, like 8 weeks ago, but this really helped. Colin McDonald taught me this, but he uses quite strenuous arm positions because what you want to do is not be leading with your shoulders. This is all about your rib cage. And for me, also about your sternum very much. So I will show you the three arm positions and you can choose what you do. I'm going to mostly use the easiest one that I sort of came up with myself, because when you're doing it a lot, which is just taking your fingertips and putting them on your sternum so that you're just bringing your attention to your rib cage and your sternum. So you're sort of telling your brain, like, this is not a shoulder movement. This is not a head and neck movement. It's here, comes from here. The movement that I would suggest starting with, if it's comfortable enough, is clasping your hands together behind the back of your head and having your elbows pointing so that you can see them. The idea being that you keep your head kind of like nicely on top of your spine rather than moving your neck around, and having your elbows there can be really helpful. Another option is to kind of do this self-hug, right? I find it can restrict your breathing a little, but it can also be really nice. So you might want to do that because that also keeps your shoulders a bit out of it. So I would suggest you start with this one on the edge of your seat. And you're just thinking about your sternum, like your third eye, right? But in the wrong place, is looking up towards the ceiling. So your lower back will arch, your sternum looks up, and then just ease back to rest. And you're noticing your rib cage. So do that just a couple more times, easing your sternum back and up, your whole rib cage moving. You could be moving around on your sits bones and then come back to rest. And take a couple of breaths just at rest. And then you're going to simply reverse that, as in you're going to take your sternum to go downwards. So it's kind of facing down between your legs, not leading with your shoulders or your neck, but really just moving your rib cage. And go do that 2 or 3 times. It's not a big bend in the middle. It's really leading with your sternum, right? So it's kind of. And then come back to rest and take a few breaths. And you can let your arms down to give them a bit of a rest. And then we're going to do a side-to-side movement. And again, you can keep this position or you can put your fingers on your sternum to guide you, right? Pick a side, doesn't matter which side first. You're going to rotate your rib cage. So it might not be a big movement. It's not a big, huge movement because your shoulders aren't helping. It's just your rib cage going to one side. And then slowly coming back to center. You're pandiculating that. And breathe before you do that again. So allow that rest part of the pandiculation and go around to that side that you've chosen. And let your head and neck go with you. I'm looking at you at the screen to make sure people are so like that. Ease back to center, breathe. You can rest your hands down if you need to. You're just going to do that predictably to the other side. And notice if the other side, the side that you didn't choose first, is harder, easier, about the same. Do you go as far, further, less far? Do that just a couple of times. And notice whether you do feel your rib cage moving, whether that even makes sense, right? And so now what I like to do with this, come back to center, just breathe, let your arms down if you need to. Is this made me think of John Lupus's stuff with the shoulders and the hips. So I'm kind of going to suggest that your rib cage and your sternum do that sort of making a circle. So you might start by going back, and then you kind of start to make a circle and turn to the side, and then go down with your rib cage and your sternum. Slowly come up, turn to that side, and then come up to center. If you really slow that down, do a couple of circles, noticing if you can do a circle, or if there's a little bit of the circle that doesn't quite work, or if at some point the circle just goes in a straight line and jumps. So just seeing whether you can make that movement, and if you can make a big circle or a little circle, and how it feels. And when you've completed a couple of circles or more in one direction, take a moment at center and then do 2 or 3 circles really slowly in the opposite direction. See if that feels very different or quite similar. And also notice if a circle even makes sense, right? Because you're going all the way out and round, all the way down, round again. And also just sense how this feels and how it might be affecting your breathing, okay? So just come back to rest when you finish your circle. You don't need to rush back. Eyes closed if you're happy to. You can let your arms relax down, or you can keep them on your chest, or you can even put your palms on your chest if that feels nice. And just take a few breaths. Notice your sternum, sense your rib cage. Are you aware of how much of it is moving as you're breathing? Do you feel it physically, or do you have just a sense of it, a sense of your breath, a sense of your rib cage, a sense of your sternum? Just notice too how your sits bones feel on the chair beneath you, how your feet feel into the ground in this position, and whether you feel that your sternum is up and in front of you, or whether you're slouching, or what your response is to that kind of movement. And then when you're ready, would you please take yourself down onto your mat and lie on your back initially? Well, probably, in fact, it'll all be, I think, lying on your back. And start with your legs flat if you're able to. But as you know, if you need a bolster under your knees, or if you need to bend your knees, that's also absolutely fine. If you're already lying down, just give yourself a bit of a soma scan. Just notice how your feet, or it'll be your ankles, right, meet the ground beneath you. How the back of your head meets the ground. Are you staring directly up at the ceiling if you open your eyes, or are you looking to one side or the other? How do those 4 corners of your torso meet the ground beneath you in this position? So the right back and the left back of your pelvis, the back of your right shoulder, the back of your left shoulder. Just notice their relationship with the ground. You might also think about this more general, more elusive felt sense, right? What are your sensations? How do you feel now that you've come out of doing all this standing work to releasing your weight much more into the ground beneath you, lying on your back on your mat? And just notice your breath. You're not changing your breath. You're not worrying about your breath, just being with it. And make sure that you're warm enough. And if you need something under the back of your head, then make sure that you have something to hand. Okay. So I'd like you to choose a leg, bend up one leg first, so that you're bent at the knee, that foot is flat on the ground. And just notice whether you choose a leg out of habit or whether you deliberately do something quite different, you vary it. And then slowly bend up the other leg so that both your legs are bent at the knee, feet flat on the ground. And just make sure your feet aren't too close to your body or too far away, so that you're lying in this position with as little effort as possible for you, or with something under your knees if you need that support. So we're just going to start with doing a couple of arch and flatten, or arch and sink. I might change my vocabulary, so I'll tell you that I tend to call it arch and sink. Many of you are familiar with this, so you can do a couple in your own time. I'll just go through one with you. You can go with my words, or you can already be doing your own thing. And I'm going to start with an arch. So on a gentle breath in, contract your lower back only as much as is comfortable for you into that small arch. You're feeling your back shorten as your front lengthens. Your pelvis and your chin rock slightly down towards your feet. And don't hold your breath, right? You can breathe as often as you need to when you're arching. And then continue to breathe as you need to slowly and with control or awareness, release that arch in your back as you release everything else that contracted to create that arch. And rest into the ground. So you really want to rest before you go into the flatten or sink part. So when you're ready, on an out breath, but keep breathing, sink your center by shortening your front, right? Your sternum and your pubic bone are actually getting closer together, shortening your front. Your pelvis is rocking up towards your eyes, and the back of your neck will contract a little bit, as if, right, you're looking up and maybe behind you. Feel the tension in your center, but keep breathing. Don't hold your breath and don't stay too long. Notice where else also starts to release as you breathe length into your front. Notice where it's easy or hard to do that. And notice as well, right, if there are any jumps or shakes or areas where you speed up, where it's not quite in your control. And you can either do another arch and flatten in your own time, or you can just rest for a moment. Okay. So wherever you are, you don't have to race to keep up. You can incorporate what you're doing to what I'm saying. So I'm going to ask you to imagine a challenging situation or a person that you really don't want to face, whether it's today or this week, it doesn't really matter. Don't make it a really big deal, but something that you really aren't that keen on doing. And then do a gentle arch in your back and see if that might feel a bit different. As if you're facing up to that thing you have to do or that person you don't really want to see, and then realize you don't have to. You can ease out of that. You can let your back release. You can let everything else release. You can just rest into the floor beneath you. Do that once more if you're happy to do that. So think about this thing that you have to deal with. Gently arch your back. Notice what else happens. Notice if maybe even your hands want to turn into very gentle fists. And then realize you're just imagining this and you can just release out of that. You don't have to deal with anything right now. And just breathe. So don't keep arching and releasing, just breathe, just rest into the ground for a moment. And now change that thought and think about as if you're just about to get up in the morning, you've had a really good night's sleep and you're yawning. And so you're doing that nice arch in your back. Maybe as part of a yawn, you can move your hands if you want to. Your arms can be part of that. So you're getting ready to face the day. And then you can ease out of that as you relax back into bed, into your mattress, and just let everything go. Keep breathing. Just do that one more time where you're imagining that you're really comfortable and you're just arching your back at the thought of doing something that you actually really quite want to do today. And then just ease that arch in your back as you go back to spend just another minute in bed, right? You're just going to stay there for a bit. So then you're going to sink, do the flatten in the center, thinking that you're just pulling maybe the duvet around you or the sheet over you to spend another few seconds in bed. So you're like sink your center, shorten your center. Back of your neck tightens, your pelvis tightens, but you're doing this for a really nice reason. You're feeling really comfortable. You're like almost hugging yourself. And then you can ease out of that and just relax into the ground beneath you. Relax back into bed. Take a little bit more time under the covers. And maybe do that once more, right? So you're sinking and really enjoying being under the covers. You might even be hugging the person that's with you or the cat, right? And just ease out of that. And just notice if not only this might feel a bit different, but it might, different muscles might contract and release when you're imagining a different scenario. So again, I'm going to ask you to think about something that's not so good. So you're maybe going to think about the same or a different situation, a person you don't want to deal with, or a situation that you would really rather avoid. So just get that sense. Just give that a little bit of thought. And then sink your center. And this time you're kind of protecting yourself from that situation or that person. You're kind of going like, right, I can just look after myself and sink away from that challenge right now. And then ease back out of that as you realize that you don't have to deal with it. And just rest. And then maybe go back to a nice positive image of arching your back to go and do something that you really want to do, or to get up in the morning and have a great day. Might be part of a yawn, might be part of just getting up, getting ready, and then ease out of that. Release back down into the ground beneath you. And then with your legs bent or with your legs straight, it's up to you, whichever is more comfortable. Just rest for a few breaths. Just noticing either right now or in retrospect, how you feel different as you contextualize those simple movements with thoughts or images of something that might be more or less stressful, more or less enjoyable. And I think what's really interesting in this is sometimes it's not just a feeling like, oh, I felt really nice about doing a yawn, but different muscles, different patterns come up in us when we think about using these movements in different contexts. So just notice if that's something that you were aware of or sensed in your own soma. And we'll do quite a short exploration of the one-sided reflex because it could, like, again, it could be quite complicated, right? But let's not make it too complicated. So if you can bend up your legs if they're straight, so you just have both knees bent, both feet flat on the ground. And I'm just going to ask you to let your knees go over maybe 4 to 6 inches in one direction and let your head go over in the same direction. And you can involve your arm in the movement if you want to. And then ease back to center. So it's a really small, gentle movement. Breathe however you need to just gently take your knees over, really not too far. Roll your head in the same direction. Your arm might want to roll with it, and just do that 3 or 4 times. And just know that this is part of walking, right? This is a rotational movement that we need to do to walk with ease. It's also just a reminder that you can have a supple center, that we're really able to be fluid movers as we walk through our lives. Finish the one that you're on by just gently, slowly coming back to center. So your knees are just pointing up to the ceiling, your head is looking straight up, or whatever that means for you right now. And you're just going to do the same thing 3 or 4 times in the other direction. So just take your knees over the other direction, your head follows the same way, your arm can involve itself if it would like to. And without rushing at all, just make the next one you do, your last one of these, whatever position you're in now, you just slowly, slowly, slowly come back to center. You might want to put your hands on your belly just to indicate to me and yourself that you're back at center. And just see how that felt, that gentle, gentle movement. It's associated with walking, but it's a nice, easy way to move. And let your arms rest back down by your sides. And then again, I'm just going to ask you to imagine something not too huge, but something or someone or a situation or an obstacle that you really would like to avoid, that you really would like to just like turn and run away from, right? Or move around or flinch away from. So just pick a side. Take your knees and your head to the same side and maybe use an arm gesture, or at least just feel that you're kind of flinching in that direction. It's almost like it's allowing you to run away in that direction. And then do let that go as you come back to center, and just do that maybe once or twice to the same side. And when you come back to center, you can experiment with doing that on the other side. So again, you might want to even put your arm up, like your knees and your head are going in one direction, and your arm is kind of pushing away the threat as well. And just come back to center and allow yourself to let that thought of an obstacle or a challenge or something you want to avoid to just go away. You don't need to stay with that thought. And just enjoy a little bit of movement from side to side. You might turn it into a wash rag where your knees go in one direction, your head turns in the opposite direction. They come back to center at the same time. Your knees go one way, your head goes the other. And really enjoying that sensation of twisting and turning and being fluid and able to change direction, change what you're doing at will. You can involve your arms in that movement however you would like to. And make it slow and try to enjoy it. Try to make this a pleasurable movement. And then just come back to center. You might want to rest your legs out flat for a moment. You're able to keep them bent if you prefer that. Just breathe, just sense. Again, just notice, give yourself a sort of mini scan, how your feet, your ankles are meeting the ground beneath you, your back, the backs of your shoulders, the back of your head, back of your pelvis. And just notice your sensations or anything that's coming up for you at all. Any areas of tension, any areas that feel much more at ease, just be aware of them. Don't worry about them. We're just going to end the section on the floor by doing a flower. You might be familiar with this. So bend up your knees, your feet flat on the ground. And I will guide you through this. I know some of you know the movement, so you can do it in your own time if you would prefer to. It's a bit like arch and sink, but with arm and leg movements added, really. One reason I'd like to end with this is it's often associated with feeling more emotion in somatic movement. I often have clients who feel more emotional in this than something like arch and flatten. So it's really interesting, but it's also just a really beautiful movement to experience. So rest into the floor. When you're ready, as you breathe out, sink your center and roll both of your arms all the way in, almost like the backs of your hands are up against your thigh. Let your knees gently press together. Keep breathing, but really you've got that tightness in your front. Allow your head and your neck to move. Take a moment to feel that tension, feel like that flower kind of closed up at night, and then slowly ease out of that. Breathe length into your front. Let your arms, your shoulders, your head, your neck, your knees, your pelvis just rest into the ground. Take a moment, okay? Allow for and enjoy this third part of the pandiculation where you're really just resting. Your brain is taking in the information that you've given it. And then gently breathe in, arch your back. Let your knees come very gently apart, no further than feels comfortable. Roll your arms out like rolling pins. Let your head and neck move however they want to. You're feeling much more like an open flower, right? This idea, that's why it's called the flower. Slowly start to ease your back. Allow your arms, your knees, your legs, your neck to just come back to rest. And really savor that movement. And I would ask you now, you can either just stay and give yourself a scan on the floor, or you can do another flower movement in your own time. Okay, so again, there is no rush. If you're still finishing up a movement, you can finish it up on the floor. I want you to think ahead. So it's almost like motor planning and slowly come up to standing. So you might want to roll over onto one side. You might want to go to kneeling. Really take your time coming up to standing and see if you're happy to come up to standing with your eyes closed or if you need to look around you, and either is fine. And again, there's no rush. If you're already standing, you can either walk around for a little bit or you can stand in place and just sense your feet into the ground beneath you. Whether that feels like it did at the beginning of class, whether any of those areas of weightedness have shifted around. And so just come to stand on your mat. See how your sternum feels, how your shoulder girdle feels, how your rib cage feels, your pelvis. See if you're looking ahead at the horizon or if you might be still looking maybe a little bit up or down or to one side or the other. Just notice. Again, it's all just information. We'll do that kind of assessment movement in a little bit as well. Before you do that, I want to do a very gentle version of that reach to the top shelf. So you can either use your hand or you can just lift your shoulder each side. But just alternate, you're reaching up to that top shelf, going onto the opposite toes slowly. So really slow it down. You don't want to do lots. You just want to reach and then really slowly come to center, gently reach up to the other side. And just sensing, does one side feel easier than the other? Do they both feel fine, but they feel different? Or do you feel really even? And as you're doing that movement, maybe make it smaller. So you're just reaching up with your shoulder. You might want your fingertips on your shoulder. So you're really thinking about four corners working, right? As one shoulder reaches up, the diagonally opposite hip also comes up. As the other shoulder goes up, its opposite hip comes up. So there's a lot of movement in your center, in your rib cage, not just in your hands, your arms, and your legs. And you can ease out of that. Just come back to stand. And as long as you're happy to, you can do that kind of ragdoll assessment. So again, you're not trying to touch your toes. It's not a huge movement, but you might want to put your hands on the front of your thighs and just let your arms float down. Once you feel comfortable that your arms are hanging in space, then take a look at the position of your hands. Notice if anything has visibly changed about where they hang, what angle they might be at, how far away they are from the floor or close to it they are compared to each other. You can either stay down there or you can come up and go back down if you want to just see how your shoulders feel. So how does the position of your hands, your two hands, echo or get reflected in how your shoulders are feeling? And has anything changed from just over an hour ago? Just notice. So this again is all information. You don't need to stay down there too long. Just see what's there. And just stand up. Again, notice where you're looking. And maybe just think about not doing a big reflex movement, but just think about doing a standing arch and flatten here. So just gently arch your back. Notice the shift in the weight on your feet. Notice if your shoulders go back and your arms roll open or not. What is arching like for you in this standing position? Keep breathing, ease out of that, and just come back to stand at rest. And then sink your front. So you're kind of taking your sternum down towards your pubic bone. Your pubic bone might come up. What happens to your feet? How does the weight shift on your feet when you move your center like this? Again, don't stay too long. Breathe length into your front. And then maybe decide if you want to finish by sinking and standing up again, or if you would like to do an arch. You might even imagine that you have a blanket over you and you're either wrapping yourself in your blanket, and that's how you would like to end class as you come out of that. Or you might prefer to really kind of arch your back and almost throw off that blanket, especially as it's 10 a.m. for a lot of you, and get ready to kind of move forward with the rest of your day. And you have a couple of minutes. So you might want to either just give yourself a scan, or again, just walk around the space that you're in, rather than either leaving straight away, which you're welcome to do, or coming straight for the discussion. Just take a minute or so, scanning yourself or walking around the space and scanning how you're walking and noticing any changes or any different sensations now that might be different from when we first met just over an hour ago.
Hey, this is Susan now. Take your time. Samantha, are there any closing remarks you want to make before I take back the class to lead the discussion?
No, I think it is really, end how you want to end and notice changes, really. And if there are obvious changes or nothing obvious, and how you feel different at the end of class. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take